Good afternoon and welcome to the Pipeline. This is the Western Standard's weekly show where we cover the top news stories of the day and of the week and discuss and analyze them. Typically we have Derek Fildebrand on with us, our publisher, but he's unavailable today. So who we do have, though, is Nadine Wellwood, who's been doing some fantastic reporting for us and doing some great interviews and videos. So watch for those on the YouTube and some of the columns. And thank you for joining us, Nadine, to fill in for Derek here.
My pleasure.
And of course, we have Dave Naylor, our news guy, who just keeps churning out that fantastic news content, making it well worth coming to the Western Standard online regularly to see what's happening in the world day by day in the West.
Hey, Corey, how's it going?
Good, good. So I am going to start, though, by speaking about our sponsor here, if I can get that overlay working. Let me see here. Derek typically runs this, but our sponsor for this show, it's brought by the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. And nobody works as hard as CCFR to fight for your ability to own and use firearms. Check out what the CCFR is doing by going to firearmsrights.ca and clicking on Why Join Us. So that's firearmrights.ca, and that's the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. These times when our rights are at risk all over the place, it's good to see somebody's working to stand up for them for us out there anyways. So we'll get on with, these main subjects in the news today. So, there's a few to cover. And something that's really been making the headlines and is just ripe for discussion is Quebec has declared that they can unilaterally basically write the Constitution for themselves or amend it and change it in their own favor. That's not terribly surprising. Quebec's never hesitated to just speak up and do things on their own. What perhaps was a little bit surprising, though, was Justin Trudeau said, yeah, I guess that's all right. And apparently Aaron O'Toole has now joined Justin Trudeau in saying, yeah, Quebec can just kind of do what they please with the Constitution. Maybe you could fill some detail in on that, Dave.
Yeah, every 10 years it seems we got to deal with this constitutional sandbox. Quebec Premier François Legault wrote to Trudeau on the weekend informing him that they're bringing in some pretty strict language laws, a la Bill 101, and they're going to have to change the Constitution unilaterally. Justin Trudeau, with his background as a part-time drama teacher, became an instant constitutional expert and basically said, yeah, that's okay. You guys can do what you want. More surprisingly, Aaron O'Toole came out and told La Presse out of Montreal that he's also in agreement with it. So that's certainly caused some shockwaves out here in the West, Corey and Nadine. Just got off the phone with Maverick Party leader Jay Hill. He was shocked by it. He said he expected Trudeau to roll over, but he certainly didn't expect O'Toole to join him. And he described it as, quote, a body blow for O'Toole's support in the West, along with his flip-flop on the carbon tax. He basically said O'Toole is going to be out of luck here in the West, Corey.
Yeah, that's just, I don't know. It's flooring. As usual, all roads lead to Quebec, I guess, when it comes to election time. Nadine, what have you been hearing in your political circles about these things as they develop?
Well, I don't think this should really shock anybody that O'Toole has come out and lent support. I mean, he's been leaning further and further to the left, trying to win over votes in Quebec and Ontario. So I'm not shocked by this at all. And to be honest, this is awesome. If Quebec can do it, then so can Alberta. Really, we just need the political will here to do so. So, I'm not upset the fact that Quebec is pushing its rights as a nation within a nation, because right now we have Indigenous populations that are nations within Canada. We have Quebec, which is a nation within Canada. Well, why can't Alberta be a nation within Canada? So I think anybody who's looking for greater independence for Alberta and Albertans, Quebec just made this really easy for us.
Yeah, Michelle Rempel, Calgary MP, literally seconds after Trudeau agreed, tweeted out, "Hey, if it's good for Quebec, it's good for Alberta too." And she suggested that Alberta rewrite Section 36 of the Constitution, which deals with economic development and everybody having a level playing field. And now she was obviously pointing out the fact no pipelines seem to get built out west. But interestingly, she spoke before Aaron O'Toole gave his approval for it. So it's going to be interesting to see if any of the Western Tory caucus members have the guts to speak up about this, because they certainly didn't on the carbon tax, did they?
No, when Aaron O'Toole lied about the carbon tax, he left his MPs flat-footed to have to deal with it. So it's not surprising that he didn't let them know that he was going to join Trudeau in supporting Quebec and ripping up our Constitution. I mean, this just, I'm sure there's better legal minds than me to speak to this, but it seems to me we've got legal mechanisms that say Quebec just can't do this. It's not a matter of opinion of the Prime Minister or the leader of the opposition. There are formulas about how we have to change the Constitution if we're ever going to. I mean, we went through that with Meech Lake and Charlottetown. We can just bypass that apparently. All it took was the will of one premier to say that we don't need to do all that. We'll just do it. That's absurd. I don't see where this is coming from. And to be honest, I'm a bit confused. What do you think, Nadine? Like, do you see a mechanism here?
Well, I mean, it's very clear in the Constitution that to make changes, there is a process. And, for any one person to be able to come out honestly and say that we can unilaterally amend it, I think is incorrect. But, then again, if you look around politically, what's happening today, nothing makes any sense. There doesn't seem to be anybody following the process. It seems to be just everybody's run amok, whether it's Liberal, NDP, Conservative. Nobody is kind of following the rules. So, I one of the things that I'm going to do, actually, and I've reached out today to the JCCF and to James Kitchen, constitutional lawyers, to ask them, how is it that Quebec can, proceed with such a thing? And, how is it that the Prime Minister can just unilaterally decide that, yeah, that's okay? So it'd be really interesting to see from the legal standing and footing, where they're going to proceed with this.
Yeah, that's a good point, Nadine. Look at Alberta. How long has Alberta been banging its head against a cement wall on Senate reform? Decades and decades and decades, and we haven't gotten anywhere. So it's particularly galling, I would think, for Albertans to see the Premier of Quebec just standing up and saying, "Okay, we're going to do it." When Albertans have been fighting for a little bit of a change for decades, Cory.
Yeah, well, it brings into question whether or not Canada, to be honest, is a country. I mean, if individual provinces can just jump up and change the rules at will, what is the Confederation exactly? This isn't a constitution. This is a set of guidelines. And a set of guidelines is just what some other independent nations might have in rough trading agreements. I mean, we've seen that too, where provinces have been allowed to restrict trade between other provinces with impunity. We're seeing that now with restricting movement, though they're using the pandemic as a reason for it. This has been, I think, an unprecedented year where we're seeing a challenge to the very basis of whether Canada is actually a nation.
And Cory, I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's, is Canada truly a nation? Trudeau has already said, a post-nation state. Now he's giving provinces the ability to amend the Constitution. We do have interprovincial trade barriers. We do have, COVID checkpoints now at provincial borders. There's so much going on here that's unprecedented, but I think what it's really done is pointed out the division that we're now seeing happen. People have been feeling it for a long time, but now it's really come to the forefront.
Dave, Premier Kenney certainly doesn't seem to like talking tough when it comes to Ottawa, or at least he talks tough but never really does much. Has there been any response from the Premier on this? I mean, Quebec and opposition leaders are speaking up, but I haven't heard anything from Premier Kenney yet.
No, he hasn't said a word yet, Cory. Ironically, he is holding a press conference as we speak on a job creation matter in Alberta. So I'm sure one of the reporters on there will ask him about it, and we'll certainly get a story out on what he says this afternoon.
Well, if one of the chosen ones wants to dip in onto that issue for him, I guess we'll see what happens. But it seems with some sticky stuff like this, these are areas that Premier Kenney tries to stay out of with the regionalist end of things. But I think he's kind of getting painted into a corner. He's going to have to start addressing Alberta's role in Confederation soon, I think.
Oh yeah, I mean he's got to say something, and if he's not asked at this press conference, I'll get a hold of his office and get a statement that way. But this is something he can't ignore when one of his premier colleagues says they're going to go it alone. He cannot stay silent on this issue. No.
So moving along, since we are starting into Premier Kenney and the UCP, this is, he says, it's been 6 days now, but this is the first pipeline we've had since all hell sort of broke loose in caucus, and the rebellion went from beyond, writing letters differing with COVID policies and exploded right into Todd Loewen demanding that Jason Kenney step aside as leader of the party. And then the party turned around and decided to not only eject Todd Loewen, which wasn't terribly unexpected, but kicked out Drew Barnes while they were at it, which, again, wasn't wholly unexpected, but he really didn't have anything to do with that letter. It was just kind of, I guess, if we're going to do house cleaning, we might as well get both of them. Dave, where are things been sitting in the news with that so far?
Well, I think the dust is slowly starting to settle. As you know, Loewen and Barnes were kicked out. I think one of the surprising things was that Dave Hansen, who came out publicly and supported the call for Kenney to resign, was left alone. And he was allowed to stay. Both Nadine and I have done interviews with Todd and Drew. Drew says he's considering perhaps running as a independent MLA in the next election. I don't think Todd has decided yet, but I don't think it's over. And if you want to read an excellent column by our publisher Derek Fildebrand, it's on the site now. He's talked to several people within the Tory caucus who say, this is almost just the beginning. It's not the beginning of the end, but the beginning of the beginning. So as we get especially closer to the next election and Jason Kenney's poll numbers keep continuing to tank, more and more MLAs are going to speak out because they're going to be in fear of their jobs, Nadine. And that's the bottom line, is keeping their jobs as you get close to the election. But you interviewed both of them. What did they tell you?
Well, I agree. I think this is just the beginning of what we're going to see from the UCP caucus. And, for Todd Loewen in particular, this is a very atypical type of reaction for him. He's more reserved. Drew has been very outspoken and very critical of Jason Kenney. And, I think Jason Kenney definitely saw this as an opportunity to get rid of Drew, which, like you said, it's interesting that Dave Hansen is the one who publicly speaks out in support of Todd Loewen, and Drew is the one that got the boot. But more importantly, I mean, it's what Todd had to say that I found particularly interesting. He really did state, he didn't mince words. And it was, Kenney is a one-man show. He doesn't listen to caucus. He doesn't respect his caucus. He dismisses, ridicules. That's not the role of an MLA or the government. They're to bring forward the concerns of their constituents. So to ridicule or to dismiss the MLA is really to ridicule and to dismiss, in my opinion, the people that they represent. And that's just not acceptable. So, I think Kenney, I said this in the last pipeline, I don't think he can recover from this. I think he realistically is grasping at straws. He's trying to regain some control, but he's using fear rather than building confidence. And the trust that has been destroyed amongst caucus and amongst the public, and we're seeing that in the polls, I don't think there's any coming back from this. I think Kenney honestly should look at a resignation and should be looking for somebody to fill his position as premier.
Yeah, well, we've seen this before, and I've written on it. Conservatives are a real pain to lead. I mean, we're independent-minded. We don't like being told what to do. We chafe under it. That's part of why we don't see progressive parties getting this kind of infighting, splitting up. But that is because there's a bit of an inherent nature. Oh, they're grumbling on the inside with their leadership, but they toe the line. It takes a real special sort of leader. There's not too many who can do it, who can manage to keep conservatives, walking in a row. And so far, Jason Kenney just hasn't proven to be able to do that so far. But yeah, I mean, we haven't seen any rumblings coming from the rest of caucus. But the thing that gets me is the startling silence from the rest of caucus right now. I mean, we know there's more discontent in there. We know there's more MLAs who have got one foot out that door. It's going to be interesting to see if he stemmed that tide or if it's just going to be one more thing, tick somebody off. We're going to see three more, they might not be getting kicked out. They might start quitting pretty soon.
Well, don't forget, there was, 18 MLAs who signed the letter protesting Kenny's lockdown. That's a good chunk of his caucus. Are all 18 of those now happy? I don't think so. Obviously, 2 have been kicked out, but I don't think the remaining 16 are all bundles of joy. And I think Kenny's got a bigger problem is that it's not just MLAs, it's the grassroots. It's down at the party constituency association level where there's numerous constituency associations trying to gather signatures and vote on whether or not to hold a leadership conference. So it's once it gets into the grassroots, Cory, I mean, you've been there a lot. Once it gets into the grassroots, very, very difficult to try and come back.
Yeah, well, and it was interesting having been there in a sense. Like I was sort of a Danielle Smith loyalist with the Wildrose Party when things were getting rough and so on. And there was a push at the final AGM she was involved with to try and get her to step aside as leader. And I pushed back hard against that, hey, cut it out. We've got to stick together. But, shortly after that, Danielle took off with the floor crossing. And as she's explained since, though, it was when caucus, it wasn't us on the floor that got her. It was, though that was a sign of things, it was caucus. When they turn on you, you're up the creek as a leader. I mean, you just can't maintain it. And Nadine, I mean, you've been watching perhaps some of the constituency actions. They need, I believe, 22 of them to force a leadership review, though, or?
Yeah, they need a significant number, at least 1/3 to force the leadership review. And it sounds, though, that Kenny has managed to push that out. So, and skirted that issue. So it looks to me, again, and these are Todd Lowen's words, Kenny's serving his own best interest, not the interest of the party by pushing out the leadership review. And it looks like now it has been pushed out. It won't happen until about 6 months before the next scheduled provincial election. So that doesn't leave a lot of time for a new leader to come in and rally the troops and build some momentum and, campaign to the grassroots. So it'll be really interesting to follow that along and to see what caucus decides to do. And, I'm just talking about local constituencies here as well. There's a lot. I mean, we saw the secretary, step down. There's a lot of people within the CAs that are speaking out very vocal about how Kenny has been dealing not only with COVID, but with Ottawa. Todd Lowen made this very clear. This is not just a COVID response. He's lacked on all the promises that he came in and he campaigned on, and he just hasn't followed through. Again, let's look at what's just happened in Ottawa, going back to our first topic. Kenny's silent. Right? Where's his comment on, okay, well, if Quebec can do this, Alberta can assert its independence in a greater capacity as well. And he's consistently refused to do so.
Yeah, I like every other UCP supporter, I expected Kenny to be driving to Ottawa in his big blue pickup truck and causing havoc and standing up for Alberta. And there's such a level of disappointment out there that he didn't do that. And hasn't done that. That it's palpable, and Cory is right in that it's very hard for a conservative leader to actually lead. They like to eat their own, Cory. I mean, they booted out Ralph Klein, arguably the most popular premier in Alberta history, and he got 77%, was it? That was enough to make him resign. So Lord knows what Kenny would get at leadership review at this moment, but I can't see it being above 50.
No, we're just seeing a real void in leadership from the UCP. Again, a lot of us disappointed. I mean, I was very optimistic about Jason Kenney. I wanted him to do really well. I as I said, I've grudgingly come to the point where I'm thinking, okay, it's 2 years in. I don't think this can be recovered. I mean, if I believe Todd said to Nadine the other day, if an election was held, the NDP, if an election was held today, we'd get an NDP government. That's frightening. I mean, this isn't a vote split we're talking about. This is a conservative party that is tanked so badly in the polls that socialists are going to beat them in Alberta. Like, how long can we let this plummet go on like this. And I'm certain a number of urban MLAs are starting to think about this. You know, it's the rural ones that we hear of the small C conservatives, and they're getting crabby, but the urban ones are ones that they won by narrow margins. These guys are in there with some tight seats, and they really need a big turnaround if they're going to keep their jobs. I mean, I like to think they're thinking of all of their constituents as well, but they're going to start looking out for their own butts too. And as Nadine said, you know, yeah, Kenny's kicked it down the road to 6 months before the election, but I think the realists in the party also understand that if there's going to be a replacement of the leader, it has to be done in this coming 6 months or so, so that you do have time to get ready for the next election. So I don't think this is over by a long shot. But getting on to party disarray, I guess, you know, here was a story that popped in and out. I guess we should give a nod to Peter McCaffrey with the Alberta Institute for catching it. It looks like the government for a little while wanted to use drones to watch us and then suddenly backed off on it. Dave, what happened there?
This is my favorite story of the week, Corey. The federal, or it's not the federal, the provincial government put out a request for proposal on Friday. They wanted somebody to operate a drone that would spy on Albertans during long weekends. It was to be looking out for overcrowding. You know, keep in mind, right now, Albertans aren't allowed to gather more than 5 people outside. So you can imagine them buzzing campgrounds and whatnot, looking for people breaking COVID regulations, looking for people breaking campfire regulations. So that was what the request wanted. They wanted somebody to operate this drone and then give them proof, give them, I guess, photographic evidence of people breaking the law. And because campsites have to be reserved under your name, obviously, the government would have an easy way to give out the tickets, and there you go. Certainly, when we went to press with the story early in the morning, reaction was just utter outrage. People thought it was an April Fool's joke, Corey, and sadly, it wasn't. A short time later, Jason Nixon, the environment minister, nixed the whole project, said that he hadn't been informed. And while drones could be used as a benefit in search and rescues and forest fires and stuff like that, they would never, ever be used to spy on Albertans enjoying a campfire and a beer. So a very strange thing to get as far as it did, Corey.
Yeah, well, and you know, they can back off on it and say, yeah, we're using it for other things, but it was pretty explicit in the call out for what they were seeking. They wanted them to go out there and spy on campers. There's no beating around the bush with that. And you know, Jason Nixon, of course, backed off on it right away. I do believe with some people making an excuse saying he didn't know they were doing that. Okay, that's fine, but then we got a question of competence, because if they're moving that far along on something this odious and you didn't know, who is in control out there? If you aren't in control of it, who is? Like, Nadine, what do you think of it as an indication of his ministry here? And I like Jason too. I don't like seeing him in trouble, but come on.
This is definitely one of two things: incompetence or lies. And, you know, as somebody who actually did a lot of RFP work in response to the federal government in my time in aerospace and defense, you don't submit an RFP, a request for proposal, without knowing what's in it and it's gone out. So I would suggest probably the latter in this. And they just got caught. And I think now that's the backtracking. They got caught saying that they were going to spy on Albertans. And that's just not something that happens in a democratic society. This, you know, the things that the government has been doing, and I'll even bring up with Pastor Stevens, for example, who, you know, was arrested on an injunction that was put into place on May 6th to stop a protest at the whistle stop. Well, they arrested this pastor saying that he was aware of this under the same injunction, but it was an illegal arrest. That had been amended by Judge Rook and, you know, didn't apply. So, you know, the government is doing things right now that, you know, the Albertans are catching on. And this is, I think, the backtrack. They just happened to get caught on this one before it became an issue, and then plead ignorance. So I honestly believe that, there's a lot more going on here behind the scenes that Albertans are not aware of. And I think that speaks to what Todd Lowen and Drew Barnes have been saying about the secrecy, and how caucus has actually said we're going one direction and Kenny just continues to go down his own direction. So there's so much happening right now in caucus and with government that people are just not aware of. Caucus is finding out about things themselves, at the time that Kenny happens to release it to everybody. So who is running the ship right now?
Nadine's right, Cory. You look at it, some bureaucrat has to go through a good amount of research, because that was a very detailed request, and probably spent several days on it coming all together. But he wouldn't have just published it himself. He would have taken it up the chain to his superior. So somebody at some level of management in the provincial government thought it would be a good idea to launch a drone to spy on campers. I mean, come on, nonsensical. But somebody in the government approved it. And Nadine's right. What the hell is going on?
Yeah, well, it's such a huge, as you said, it seemed like it was an April Fool's joke. I mean, what were you thinking moment? Like, this is right out of, for those who've read it, 1984. Government having Big Brother zooming along, watching you. Behave yourself, because we could be having a little camera hiding behind the trees watching you. I've done some things in the woods while camping. I don't want a drone broadcasting. And I got to feel a lot of people aren't going to want to see that either. I mean, this is putting somebody else at risk sitting in a vehicle spying on us. But, I mean, it was just absurd. Like, nobody at any of these levels, there wasn't somebody said, gee, they might get an adverse response to this one. Like, it's just astounding. I kind of expected, as you said, at lower levels of bureaucracy, okay, some pinhead recent graduate who really hadn't thought it through, but it's got to go through a few levels. I mean, it's an RFP. If you could just let anybody put one out there, you can imagine the corruption as you start getting different proposals going and such as well. I mean, there's layers of controls, and they seem to have been okay with this.
Yeah, and to think that they might get away with it. Let's assume the worst, that they knew what they were trying to do, and they just thought, okay, no, Albertans won't care. We've managed to do this to them so far. They'll let us do this. But at some point, Albertans are going to stand up and say, no, that's a right that I will not lose, and this is where I stand my ground. This is the hill to fight on.
Yeah, well, and this got exposed at the point, as I said, Peter McCaffrey caught it, and good on him. But, I mean, what if this had gotten farther along and we'd gotten to a weekend and it hits the news once somebody shoots one of the things out of the sky? Or, when somebody does find themselves suddenly presented with a ticket, and for evidence, they'll show these aerial pictures of them camping. This isn't going to look good. I mean, this would have turned into a disaster farther down the road as well. People would have been furious. I'm just floored, and I guess just disappointed. I'd like to, go on to more positive things about our government one of these days, and I'm sure sometimes something's going to happen, but it's just not this week.
Yeah, one day we'll get something right.
Well, either way, I think we've kind of covered it for this week. What are you working on for up and coming stories, Dave?
It seems to be all constitution all the time at the moment. Published the O'Toole story this morning. I just published a Jay Hill Maverick Party reaction, and then as soon as we're done from here, we'll find out what Premier Kenny has to say. Great.
Nadine, what have you been up to here?
Well, we're hopefully going to get some more interviews with some of the people around these constitutional issues and follow-ups. Obviously, we did a great follow-up with Ty Northcott for the No More Lockdowns Rodeo. And, we haven't heard from Chris Scott yet, so hopefully we'll get a chance to speak with him as well and his experience. And we'll just keep, we'll try. It's so hard right now, to be honest. Derek and I were talking the other day, and he's like, what do you report on? There's so much going on. And like the RFP that we just talked about, the request for proposal, people just don't pay attention to that type of stuff, right? I mean, people come, they look for headlines, they look for quick news, and there's so much going on in pretty much any area. Dave has got to be just swamped with picking and choosing. What am I going to report on today? What's at the highest top of the bank there?
I feel like a doctor in triage.
Yeah.
What patients can I save? What patients can't I save? So it makes it interesting.
Well, and to pat our own back a bit, with these things as they broke, I mean, the live reporting of the caucus meetings that were coming through and the updates that you were putting out, Dave, and with this exposure of the drone idea, like this didn't come from the Mother Corp CBC. This didn't come from Post Media. It's small groups and media sources that are breaking this sort of thing. And that's what the Western Standard's about. And just to get into it, like, we need our subscribers. We appreciate our subscribers. They've been doing great. It's growing. It's well worth it to jump in, get a subscription, all these breaking news stories, things, and it helps us be able to keep up with these things. The more people jump on board, the more sponsors, the more content we can produce, and everybody's happy except for the people we report upon. And so be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel as well, and Facebook, so that you can catch these updates, these shows when they pop up. We do specials sometimes as things break, and you'll see them as they're coming out. And again, consider sponsoring us, or definitely consider, supporting our sponsors, because they're helping us out. And that's the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights. And nobody works as hard as them, as we said, to fight for your ability to use and own firearms. What do we got there? Oh, yes, the CCFR. They're suing the federal government on behalf of federal gun owners right now, actually. So, consider becoming a member, donating to their legal funds, because, again, if we don't stand up for our rights, they're going to be taken away. We know that. And these guys are standing up for them. So go to firearmrights.ca, and you can click Why Join, and you can support them, and they're supporting us. Again, we're all standing up for ourselves in that good conservative Albertan Western sort of way. So thanks again, Dave and Nadine and everybody who tuned in today. Don't forget to tune in tomorrow. We've got Nathan Gita with his fantastic show, Mountain Standard Time, from 10 till noon. He gets some great guests on there. And I'll be on Friday ranting and raving with a number of guests as well between 10 and noon. So thanks again, and we will talk to you all later.